Choose your mother. The mafia boss told his son he pointed straight at the waitress, who... The neon sign of the Magnolia Mile Diner bled pink and blue onto the wet asphalt of a New Orleans street well past midnight. Rain had washed the air clean, leaving behind the smell of damp pavement and sweet olive. Inside, under the hum of fluorescent lights, Avery Kincaid wiped down a Formica table, her reflection staring back from the chrome napkin dispenser. She was a single mother, running on the fumes of cheap coffee and sheer willpower. Her late-night shift was quiet, just a few truckers nursing mugs and a couple huddled in a corner booth. In her own corner, propped against the salt shakers, her old laptop was open. A dull textbook on network protocols lay beside it. Avery juggled refilling coffee cups with studying for her cybersecurity certification. A digital lifeline she prayed would pull her and her daughter out of this grind. The hiss of tires on the slick street broke the diner's quiet rhythm. It was too fast, too aggressive. A trio of black, tinted-windowed SUVs braked hard, their sleek bodies looking alien against the diner's faded charm. The few customers froze. The cook paused his spatula mid-flip. The diner door opened, the bell above it muffled by the sudden, heavy silence. Severin LaRosa stepped inside. He was a man who didn't belong in a place like this. His suit was dark, impeccably tailored, and moved with him like a second skin. He commanded the room not with noise, but with an absolute, chilling stillness. Flanking him were two men built like bank vaults, their eyes scanning every corner. But the focus of Severin's attention was the small hand he held in his own. Nico LaRosa, 8 years old, looked tiny and overwhelmed, his eyes wide as he took in the strange, bright room. Avery felt a prickle of unease. This was the Gilded Crescent. This was the man whose name was whispered in relation to every dock deal and political maneuver in the city. "Coffee," Severin said, his voice low and smooth, not directed at anyone in particular. He guided Nico toward the cleanest booth. Avery grabbed a menu she knew he wouldn't read and a fresh pot of coffee. As she approached, another man pushed through the diner door, this one dressed as a delivery driver, holding a large insulated bag. "Order for..." the driver began, looking down at a clipboard. Everything happened in a second. The driver's hand didn't go for a pen. It dove into the bag and came out with a snub-nosed revolver. He raised it, aiming directly at Severin's back. Nico screamed. Avery didn't think. She reacted. With a desperate yell, she swung the heavy glass pot of scalding coffee in a hard arc. It shattered against the gunman's chest and face. He roared in pain, hot liquid and glass shards spraying everywhere. The shot went wide, muffled by the man's cry. Severin had moved just as fast. Spinning around, he grabbed a heavy, polished silver tray of pastries from the counter and held it up like a shield, pulling Nico behind him just as the gunman, blind with pain, fired again. The bullet slammed into the tray with a deafening thwack, embedding itself in the metal. Nico was hysterical, clutching his father's leg. The bodyguards were moving, but the gunman was still a threat, fumbling to clear his weapon, his hand shaking from the burns. The diner was chaos. People were screaming, diving under tables. Avery had stumbled back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her eyes darted across the linoleum floor, greasy and littered with shattered glass. She saw a heavy stainless steel teaspoon dropped by a fleeing customer. Before the gunman could aim again, before the bodyguards could close the distance, Avery lunged. She didn't grab the gun. She didn't try to fight him. She scooped up the spoon and with all her weight jammed the handle hard against the side of the pistol grip. There was a metallic click. The magazine, heavy with bullets, dropped free from the gun and skittered across the floor. The gunman stared at his useless weapon, bewildered. In that instant, Severin's guards were on him, a blur of professional, brutal efficiency. They subdued him, neutralized the threat, and hauled him to his feet without a sound. The silence that fell was worse than the gunshot. It was thick, vibrating with adrenaline. Severin LaRosa slowly lowered the dented tray. He looked at his son, checking him for injuries, his hands surprisingly gentle. Then he looked up. His eyes, the color of dark whiskey, found Avery. She was breathing hard, still clutching the bent teaspoon, her knuckles white. He didn't thank her. He just watched her, his expression unreadable, calculating. He noted the way she hadn't screamed after throwing the pot, the way she hadn't tried to be a hero, but had instead executed a precise, tactical move. She hadn't aimed for the man. She had aimed for the mechanism. Sirens wailed in the distance. Predictably late, the Metropolitan Public Safety Ward officers would arrive soon to tape off a scene they didn't understand. Among the first through the door, however, was a woman in a plain pantsuit who blended perfectly with the background. She flashed a badge, Federal Urban Integrity Service, Agent Juno Morrow. She ignored the local cops, her sharp eyes taking in Severin, the subdued gunman, the dented tray, and finally, Avery Kincaid. She quietly began taking pictures with her phone. The diner owner, Sal, emerged from the kitchen, shaking, his white apron stained with grease. "Mr. LaRosa, sir, the damage, Severin reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick stack of cash. Dropping it on the counter, it was far more than enough to cover the damages. "The boy," Severin said, his voice cutting through the remaining tension, "needs a mother." Sal's mouth snapped shut. Avery stared, confused. Severin turned to his son. Nico was still trembling, his face pale, but the immediate terror had faded, replaced by a stunned awe as he looked between his father and the waitress. "Nico," Severin said, his voice softening just enough for the boy to hear, "choose your mother." The room held its breath. The cops, the FUIS agent, the patrons peeking out from under tables, all eyes were on the small boy. Nico caught his breath, a small, hitched sound, and pointed a trembling finger straight at Avery. She saved Dad." A sharp, hysterical laugh bubbled up in Avery's throat. She choked it back, her mind reeling. It was a joke. It had to be some kind of sick, powerful man joke. She looked at Severin, expecting a smirk, a dismissal. Severin LaRosa was not smiling. His gaze was flat, absolute, and locked onto hers. "Then," he said, the words landing like a sentence, "we have a mutual problem." Avery physically recoiled, the bent spoon falling from her hand with a clatter that seemed excessively loud in the stunned silence. "That is not funny," she snapped, her adrenaline-fueled courage overriding her fear of the man. "I am not part of this. I have a daughter. She's 11 years old. I work 2 jobs to pay off my mother's hospital bills and to keep our apartment. I do not have time for whatever this rich man game is." She looked at Nico, her expression softening for just a moment. The boy was still watching her, his dark eyes mirroring his father's intensity. "I'm glad you are okay, kid, but I am just the waitress." Severin LaRosa watched her, unfazed by her rejection. His guards had the gunman secured near the exit, and the local police were busy taping off the entrance, effectively trapping everyone inside. "It is not a game," Severin said, his voice quiet but carrying. "That was a man from the Bayou Serpents. Because of what you did, what my son saw you do, you are now involved. They do not leave witnesses who interfere." "I did not interfere," she lied, her voice rising. "I dropped a coffee pot and a magazine," he corrected. He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her, but his presence seemed to suck the air from her space. "I am offering a contract, protection. You will tutor Nico for a few weeks. Keep him calm. The media will see it as a compassionate story, and the serpents will see you under my shield. Your daughter, Mara, will be included in that protection. I will pay off the hospital debt and cover your expenses." It was a lifeline. It was a noose. "No," Avery said, the word final. "I will not bring this danger near my daughter." He tilted his head, a flicker of something annoyance, perhaps respect in his eyes. "You already have?" The police finished their initial sweep, and the diner's occupants were finally allowed to leave, one by one. After giving statements, Avery, exhausted and smelling of burnt coffee, pushed her way out into the damp, pre-dawn air. She had only taken 2 steps toward her aging sedan when Agent Juno Morrow materialized from the shadow of the neighboring building. Avery Kincaid. It was not a question. Morrow was sharp, angular, and looked as if she had not slept in days. "You've got quick hands." "I'm tired. I want to go home to my daughter." "You think La Rosa's gonna let you?" Juno stepped closer, blocking her path. "He owns everything you just walked out of, and now he thinks he owns you." She held up her phone, showing a grainy image of a digital ledger. "Severin La Rosa is washing millions. He uses a crypto front called Lapis Gate, stable coins routed through offshore accounts, cleaner than bleach." Avery frowned, the cybersecurity student in her recognizing the terms. "What does that have to do with me?" "He offered you a job. Didn't he, money?" Juno held out a tiny object. It looked like a cheap cat-shaped keychain. "He will pay you. When he does, when he accesses his digital wallet near you, I want you to plug this utility in. It is a simple keylogger. It will not harm his system. It just copies the transaction data." "You want me to spy for you? Absolutely not." Avery tried to push past. Juno's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. Her grip was like steel. "You have a daughter? Mara? 11 years old. Goes to the charter school on Esplanade. Plays violin." Avery's blood ran cold. "You are working 2 jobs, behind on rent, medical debt up to your eyes," Juno continued, her voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper that was more threatening than a shout. "It looks like an unstable environment, Miss Kincaid. It would be a tragedy if child welfare had to step in and check on Mara's living situation." Avery stared at the FUIS agent, the reality of her situation crashing down. She was trapped. "You are protecting me," she said, the words tasting like ash. "We protect your daughter," Juno corrected, pressing the USB keychain into Avery's numb hand. "You just give us La Rosa." Avery drove home on autopilot, the cat keychain heavy in her pocket. She parked and ran up the 3 flights of stairs to her small apartment, desperation making her clumsy with her keys. The key slid in but would not turn. She frowned, jiggling it. Before noticing the brass, the lock was loose. Someone had tampered with it. She pushed the door open, her heart in her throat. "Mara?" The apartment was silent, the faint smell of stale paint and old wood. Nothing seemed missing. The laptop was still on the kitchen table, her textbooks beside it. Then she saw it. On the wall above the sofa was a framed photograph of Mara, taken last spring at her violin recital. Mara was beaming, her bow held high. The frame was crooked. Avery knew it was not crooked when she left for her shift. She straightened it every morning. Someone had been inside. Someone had touched her daughter's picture. It was a message, far louder than Juno's threats. Her hands shook so badly she could barely dial. She did not call the police. They were either useless or on someone's payroll. She called the number on the business card Severin had slid into her apron pocket before she left the diner. He answered on the first ring. "Kincaid." "Someone was in my apartment," she said, her voice tight, trying to keep the panic out. "They did not take anything. They just moved a picture of my daughter." She was not asking for help. She was delivering a warning. "You said I was involved. You were right. Now they know where I live. So whatever shield you think you have, it is not working." She hung up before he could reply, her back sliding down the wall. Less than 5 minutes later, a sharp, polite knock echoed. She opened the door to a woman she recognized from the diner. She was tall, severe, with her dark hair pulled into a tight bun. "Miss Kincaid, I am Sophia Vale, Mr. La Rosa's head of security." The woman's eyes were intelligent and missed nothing. "Please pack a bag for yourself and your daughter. We are moving you." "I'm not going anywhere." "They tampered with your lock. They left a warning. The next visit will not be so subtle," Sophia said, her voice flat, stating facts, not opinions. "The car is downstairs. Mister, La Rosa has already arranged for your daughter's school transfer and security. We are going to the Garden District safe suites." It was not a request. Avery, trapped by the serpents and the feds, had no cards left to play. An hour later, Avery and a very confused, sleepy Mara were escorted into a penthouse suite that was larger than their entire apartment building floor. It was all clean lines, bulletproof glass, and sterile luxury. Nico LaRosa was sitting on a plush white rug, shuffling a deck of Uno cards. He looked up when they entered, his gaze fixing on Mara. "Hi," Mara said, clutching her violin case, sensing the tension but too curious to be scared. "Hi," Nico mumbled back. He held out the deck. "Do you know how to play?" As the two children awkwardly began a game, a strange, quiet bubble of normalcy in the midst of madness, Severin LaRosa emerged from a side room. He met Avery's furious, frightened gaze. "They are safe here." "This is not safe," Avery shot back. "This is a cage. You did this. You and that agent—" "Agent Morrow is a problem," Severin interrupted. "But she is not the one who picked your lock. You're right, this is my world, but you are the one who threw the coffee." He walked toward the window, looking out over the city lights. "I want to be clear. Miss Kincaid, I saw my son's face tonight. He saw his mother die. He has not trusted anyone to be in a room with him since—" He turned back to her, his expression stripped of all pretense. "I do not need a wife. I do not need a partner. I need someone that my son believes will not lie to him. He chose you, because you saved me." "I'm not a bodyguard." "I have those," Severin said. "I need you to sit with him, do his homework, and be present. I need him to see one person in his life who is not paid to protect him, but who does it anyway. I need him to trust again. Can you do that?" The Garden District safe suite was a world away from her apartment. Avery woke to the smell of fresh beignets and rich chicory coffee, not the stale scent of her building's hallway. The penthouse had a wide, sunlit terrace overlooking a lush courtyard. In the distance, the sound of a lone saxophone drifted up from the street, a mournful, beautiful New Orleans melody that felt both lazy and urgent. When she emerged, Mara and Nico were already at a sleek glass table, their heads bent over a card game, their quiet giggles a strange sound in the opulent room. Severin LaRosa stood by a coffee machine that looked more complex than her laptop. He was focused on the task, a small frown line between his brows. He poured a cup and brought it to her. It was perfect, dark and strong. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded, then took a seat opposite his son, picking up a worksheet from the table. "This. Science, technology, engineering, math. It is science." Nico sighed, the sigh of a long-suffering 8-year-old. "It is about thermal conductivity. Dad, we have to do the experiment." Severin stared at the paper as if it were written in code, turning it over, then back. He was holding it upside down. "Right, thermal." Avery could not stop a small, surprised laugh from escaping. "You are reading it wrong." His head snapped up, his eyes sharp. For a second, she saw the boss, the man from the diner, then, just as quickly, the facade cracked, revealing a man who was simply and profoundly out of his depth. He looked exhausted. He slid the paper across the table to her. "I manage half the city's shipping," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I cannot understand homework for an 8-year-old. Avery looked at the sheet. "It is simple," she said, a sense of competence settling her nerves. She walked to the sterile, state-of-the-art kitchen. "Nico, get me the sugar bowl and a metal spoon." A moment later, she was guiding Nico, showing him how to hold the spoon with a sugar cube over the low, controlled flame of the gas stove. She was careful, her hand steady over his. They watched as the sugar first turned brown, then black, a wisp of smoke rising. "That is caramelization, then combustion," Avery explained, her voice in teacher mode. "The heat changes it, the metal spoon gets hot fast. Right, that is conductivity. The heat travels through it." Nico was mesmerized, his eyes bright with understanding. "Wow." Avery glanced over her shoulder. Severin was leaning against the door frame, watching them. His suit jacket was off, his sleeves were rolled up, and the usual armor of his stillness was gone. He looked, for a fleeting moment, like a normal father. "You're good at that," he said quietly. She turned back to the stove, switching it off. At science. At this, he gestured vaguely at the kitchen, at Nico, at the domestic scene. At being a parent, I do not know how. I only know how to protect, how to own, how to fight. His voice was a near whisper. A confession not meant to be analyzed, but she heard the raw truth in it. I do not know how to build. The fragile peace shattered when her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number. The message was short. Choose a side, serpents. Attached was a photograph. It was Mara, walking out of the school gates, her violin case in her hand, her bright pink backpack vivid. The photo was taken from a distance, through the school's iron fence. Avery's stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. Her hand was shaking as she gripped the phone. They were watching her daughter. Right now. Sophia Vale, who seemed to appear and disappear silently, was suddenly at her side. Avery did not need to show her the phone. Sophia had already seen the change in her expression. We changed the route, Sophia said immediately, turning to Severin. Full lockdown protocols. The children stay inside. No, Avery said, her voice sharp with a fear that felt like anger. You cannot. You will not. You cannot lock her in a glass tower. She has her violin lesson. She has her life. If you change everything, if you make her a prisoner, then they have already won. It is just like I said. You are kidnapping her legally. Severin looked at her, his face a mask of conflict. He was a man of absolutes. Control, lockdown, her safety is paramount. Her life is paramount, Avery countered, stepping toward him. And that means letting her live it. We just have to be smarter, not harder. They expect you to lock her down, so do not. He held her gaze, a long, calculating stare. She was challenging his methods, his entire way of operating. He was seeing a different kind of strength, one that did not come from a gun. Finally, he gave a curt nod to Sophia. Standard route, he ordered. Double the unseen protection. No visible guards. The tension remained, thick and unspoken, through the rest of the day, that evening. Severin was preparing for a late meeting. He stood in the grand foyer, adjusting the cuffs of his dark suit. He looked every inch the man who ran the city's shadows. He was struggling with his collar, the small tab on his crisp white shirt stubbornly crooked. It is... Avery stepped forward without thinking. It is crooked. He stopped, his hands falling to his sides, holding perfectly still. She was suddenly closer to him than she had ever been. She could smell the faint, clean scent of expensive soap and the sharp smell of laundry starch. Her fingers brushed the warm skin of his neck as she reached for the collar. He was solid and warmer than she expected. His breath hitched. It was almost imperceptible, a tiny intake of air, but she felt it. Her own heart gave a heavy thump. She focused on the task, her fingers fumbling slightly with the stiff fabric. When she finished, her hand lingered for a split second on the smooth wool of his lapel. She looked up. His eyes were not on her hands, they were on her mouth. The air between them became thick, heavy, and charged. Neither of them moved. It was a question. Hanging in the absolute silence of the penthouse, broken only by the distant saxophone, he leaned in, just a fraction of an inch, his gaze dark and intense. Avery snatched her hand back as if the fabric had burned her. She took a quick step away, her cheeks hot. There. It is fixed. Severin cleared his throat, the moment broken. He straightened his cuffs, his composure instantly, perfectly back in place, but his eyes were still watching her. Thank you. He turned and was gone. The next day, she met Juno Morrow in a crowded French Quarter cafe. Juno slid the cheap pink cat keychain across the table. He trusts you now, Juno said, her voice brisk. He is paying your mother's bills. He will use his laptop, his digital wallet, near you. Plug this USB utility in. We need the Lapis Gate data. Avery stared at the keychain. She thought of Severin, looking helpless in front of a homework sheet. She remembered the raw, unguarded confession in his voice. It was all getting too complicated. If I do this, Avery said, her voice quiet and steady, forcing a coldness she did not feel. I need assurances, not just your threats. Juno raised an eyebrow. My mother, she is in a long-term care facility. Massive medical debt. I want a new identity for her. Someplace safe, and the debt wiped clean. And for me and Mara, full federal immunity for anything I do while associated with him, and for anything I might have done to get by before. Juno smiled. It was a cold, thin expression that did not reach her eyes. Done. You get us La Rosa, and you and your family get a clean start. She agreed too quickly. There was no hesitation, no need to check with a superior. A deal that big, made that fast, was a lie. That night, Avery sat at the kitchen island in the silent penthouse. The cat keychain was heavy in her palm. Severin's personal laptop was in his study, the door open. He was trusting her. She thought about Juno's easy lie. She thought about the serpent's photo of Mara. She was caught between two monsters, two organizations that would crush her without a second thought. She did not go to his study. She did not plug in the USB. Instead, she opened her own battered laptop. Her cybersecurity courses had taught her more than just terminology. Lapis Gate. Severin's name was tied to it. But the digital whispers she had found online suggested a different architect. She put the keychain aside. She did not need Juno's tool. She spent 2 hours tracing the public ledger, following the faint, complex digital trail of the stablecoin. She found the entry point. She could not access the main data, but she could see the architecture. She began to copy the transaction path, the digital map of how the money moved. She saved it to a hidden, encrypted partition on her own hard drive. It was not for Juno. It was not for Severin. It was for her. It was her own insurance policy. The afternoon sun was warm, filtering through the oak trees as the black armored SUV pulled away from the curb of the charter school. Avery was in the follow car, a black sedan, just behind it. It was a compromise. She and Severin had reached Mara and Nico could attend school, but only with a full security detail. They were 3 blocks from the school on a quiet, tree-lined avenue when a heavy-duty pickup truck, rusted and red, blasted through a stop sign. It did not slow down. The pickup slammed directly into the side of the children's SUV, a sickening crunch of metal and glass. The force of the impact spun the heavy vehicle a full 180 degrees before it even stopped moving. Smoke grenades shattered the SUV's back windows, instantly filling the street with thick, choking gray smoke. It was an ambush, a kidnapping. Avery was out of the sedan before her own driver had even stopped, her keys still in her hand. "Mara!" she screamed. Doors flew open from a parked van across the street. 3 men, masked and in tactical gear, moved toward the SUV, their weapons low. Sophia Vale, in the front seat of the lead car, was already returning fire, her shots precise and controlled. Avery ran into the smoke. She yanked on the SUV's back door. It was jammed from the crash. Nico was screaming, a high-pitched sound of pure terror. "Mara, are you hurt?" Avery yelled, pulling uselessly at the handle. "We are okay, Mama," Mara's voice came back, tight with fear but steady. "The door is stuck." One of the attackers saw Avery. He leveled his weapon, not at her, but at the door handle, to shoot the lock. He was trying to get in. "Get down!" Avery shouted. She found a rock part of a garden border and smashed the reinforced window. It cracked, spider-webbed, but did not break. She hit it again and again, adrenaline giving her a strength she did not possess. The glass finally gave way. "Nico, unbuckle," Avery commanded, reaching through the broken glass, ignoring the shards cutting her arm. She fumbled for his seatbelt, released it, and dragged him toward the window. "Get out! Go to the follow car run." She shoved him out the window. Nico hit the ground, dazed. "Go!" she roared. She turned back for her daughter. "Mara, come on." "I am calling," Mara said, her fingers flying on her phone's screen. She was not dialing. She was texting. A code. Avery had taught her that if she was ever in trouble and could not talk, to text a specific code to 911. Her daughter was calm, focused, and following her training. An attacker grabbed Avery, spinning her around. He was not one of the tactical men. He was one of the guards from the penthouse. She recognized his eyes. He wore a small embroidered patch on his vest, a stylized crown delta. Before he could secure his grip, Sophia was there. The fight was brutally short. Sophia moved with a dancer's grace and a butcher's efficiency. The man went down. "Kroll's man," Sophia yelled, her voice tight. "Insider, get the children to the backup go." Avery pulled Mara through the window just as the follow car screeched up beside them. She shoved both children into the back, piled in on top of them, and screamed at the driver. "Go, go now!" The sedan fishtailed, tires smoking, and sped away, leaving Sophia and the remaining guards to handle the firefight. Severin LaRosa arrived at the scene 10 minutes later. The smoke had cleared, leaving the smell of cordite and burnt rubber. The police were there, but they kept their distance, watching him. The red pickup truck was abandoned. Its driver fled. The remaining attacker was dead. Severin walked to the wrecked SUV, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked at the point of impact, the smashed windows. He looked at the spot where his son was supposed to be. The seat was littered with shattered glass and something else, a small, bright, almost fluorescent pink smudge. He reached in and touched it. Nail polish? Mara had been painting her nails a ridiculous, cheerful pink the night before. The smudge was on the seat where Nico should have been. It was on the floor, on the door, where Mara had been. But the heaviest smudge was on the other side, where Avery had climbed in. Severin closed his eyes for a moment. He understood. Avery had been in the follow car, the safe car. She had run toward the bullets. She had not pulled her own daughter out first. She had gotten his son, the target, out. She had put Nico's life before her own, and possibly even before her own child's. That was a loyalty he had never seen. It was a loyalty he did not know how to command, and he had no idea what to do with it. Back in the penthouse, the silence was heavy. A medic had bandaged Avery's arm. Mara was quietly drawing at the kitchen table, her hand shaking. Severin walked in, his suit jacket off, his face grim. Nico was on the sofa, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, staring at nothing. "Nico," Severin said, his voice rough, "are you all right?" Nico flinched, curling tighter. Avery walked out of the kitchen, holding 2 glasses of water. She ignored Severin, walked to the sofa, and sat down beside Nico, not touching him, just sitting. Nico uncurled. He launched himself at her, burying his face in her side, his small hands gripping her shirt. His whole body was shaking. "You are like Mom," he whispered, his voice muffled and heartbreaking. "She was brave." He took a shuddering breath. But you do not make me be strong right away." Avery's arms, one of them bandaged, wrapped around the small boy. She held him, her eyes closed, her own face pale with a mixture of pain and a fierce, primal protectiveness. She looked at Severin over the top of his son's head. Her gaze was not one of triumph or of accusation. It was one of shared, terrifying responsibility. The elevator dinged. The private doors opened, and Agent Juno Morrow stepped out. Flanked by 2 stone-faced FUIS agents, she held up a warrant. "Severin LaRosa, we have a warrant to search the premises in relation to the ongoing investigation into Lapis Gate, following this afternoon's public disturbance," she announced, her voice ringing with false authority. While her agents fanned out, Juno cornered Avery near the kitchen. "That was quite a show," she hissed, her eyes glinting. "You are getting in deep. Did you plant the USB utility?" Avery looked at the federal agent. The fear from the attack was gone, replaced by a glacial calm. "I want a protection order," Avery said, her voice low and even. "Not a verbal promise, not a threat, a legal, binding document from the Federal Urban Integrity Service, stating that my daughter, Mara Kincaid, is a protected party. When I have that paper in my hand, we can discuss your toys." The attack was too public. The media went insane. LaRosa's new love caught in gangland shooting. The Waitress and the Mob Boss, a New Orleans romance. The narrative was set. Severin, seeing the new, unwanted spotlight, made a move. He did not issue a press release. He appeared on a popular, serious local podcast. "She is not my wife," Severin said, his voice smooth and clear. "She's not my lover. She's the first person who's been completely honest with my son since his mother died. I chose to put an honest person near my child. The Bayou Serpents mistook that for a weakness. They were wrong." His words, meant to clarify, only fanned the flames to the serpents. Avery was no longer a witness. She was a symbol. She was the one who had defied them twice and was now being publicly championed by their rival. The rumors from the underworld were fast. The Bayou Serpents had put a price on Avery's head. The contract was no longer for tutoring. Severin, trapped by his own strategy, was forced to make it real. That night, he called a meeting of his most trusted people. He brought Avery, her arm in a sling, to stand beside him. He made the declaration, and in doing so, publicly and irrevocably, pulled her into his circle of trust. The price on her head forced Avery into a new reality. She was no longer just a tutor or a temporary guest. She was a target, and by extension, a prisoner of the Gilded Crescent's protection. But her mind refused to be idle. The attack, the Crown Delta patch Sophia had identified, had given her a name: Kroll. Sebastian Kroll, Severin's man of finance. She spent 2 days locked in the penthouse, her laptop her only weapon. While Severin and Sophia were busy solidifying the perimeter, she dove back into the encrypted partition she had built, tracing the data paths of Lapis Gate. The public ledger was a map, and she followed it. Juno had been wrong, or perhaps had been intentionally misleading. The money was not just disappearing into offshore wallets. It was being atomized, broken down into thousands of tiny transactions. It was being laundered through a network of coastal supermarket gift cards, a brilliant, low-level, high-volume scheme. But the most critical piece of data was the signature. Every major transaction cluster had a digital signature, a key. It was not Severin LaRosa's. The cryptographic key belonged to Sebastian Kroll. Severin was not the architect of Lapis Gate. He was its beneficiary. Kroll was the one with his hands on the code. Avery dug deeper, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She analyzed the network traffic logs around her own searches, and she found it: a ghost, a monitoring account, running parallel to her own queries. It was routed through a server she recognized, one belonging to the Federal Urban Integrity Service. Juno was not just watching Severin, she was watching everyone connected to Lapis Gate. She was not just trying to catch Severin, she was trying to catch whoever was running the system, and she was perfectly willing to let Avery get caught in the middle. Juno wanted to take down both Kroll and Severin, a career-making bust, and she did not care who she had to sacrifice to do it. That evening, she found Severin on the terrace. He was staring out at the city, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. "The man in the attack," she said, her voice quiet. "The one from Crown Delta. That is Kroll's private security." Severin's shoulders tensed. "Yes." "I have been looking at Lapis Gate," she continued, moving to stand beside him, not near him. "You're not the one moving the money. Kroll is— the digital signature on the master wallets is his." He turned, his eyes searching her face in the twilight. He did not look surprised. He looked confirmed. "Kroll," he said, his voice a low rasp, "built my offshore structures. He brought me into the modern age. He made the Gilded Crescent float on data. Not just on barges. He made me untouchable." "He is playing you," Avery said. "He's running his own schemes inside yours. The gift card network is his, not yours." "I have suspected," Severin admitted, turning back to the city. The confession seemed to cost him. For 6 months. Small discrepancies. But he built the fortress. He holds all the keys. To move against him without proof is to blow up your own bank," Avery finished. "I know. So we get proof. We make him move in the real world." He looked at her, his curiosity piqued. "Your Gilded Crescent Foundation," she said, the plan forming as she spoke. "You are a philanthropist. You hold fundraisers. Hold one." "A party," he scoffed. "A trap," she corrected. "Hold an art auction, a big, public, high-profile charity event. Make it known that all major donations will be instantly converted to cash for the charity. You invite the press. You invite the city. And you make Kroll handle the conversion. You force him to move the crypto to fiat, but not from his desk. Make him do it at the event, at a terminal you provide, with infrastructure cameras watching his every move." A flicker of a smile, a rare and dangerous thing, touched Severin's lips, a bait. The plan took on a life of its own. The children, sensing the shift in energy, wanted to be involved. "If you are selling art, can I sell mine?" Nico asked one morning, holding up a watercolor. It was a painting of the Crescent City Connection Bridge, done in bright, hopeful colors, with streaks of rain that looked like lights. "We can give the money to the Starlight Quarters. They help kids who have to leave home." Avery felt her heart clench. She looked at the painting, at the boy's earnest, hopeful face. He was trying to make something good out of the chaos his father had created. Her resolve hardened. She would protect this child. "That," she said, her voice thick, "is the best idea I have heard all day." The only flaw in the plan was the one knocking on her door. Juno Morrow returned, her patience gone. "The auction is a nice touch. Very public. My team will want a presence, and I want that data." Avery held up the pink cat keychain. "If I give you this, you will put your own tech in. You will disrupt the play. We are planting the tech, Kincaid, with or without you." "Fine," Avery said, surprising her. "But you do it my way. I will set up the donation terminal. You can put your hardware on it, but I am running the system through a virtual sandbox." Juno narrowed her eyes. "A sandbox?" "It is a contained environment," Avery explained, her tech student persona clicking into place. "It ensures your software does not accidentally crash the auction. It is for system stability." It was a lie. The sandbox would not just contain Juno's tech, it would log it. Avery was building a trap inside a trap. She would record every query, every command, every byte of data Kroll entered. And she would also record every byte of data Fuis tried to steal. When Juno left, satisfied, Sophia Vale stepped out from the hallway. Her face was grim. She had heard the exchange. "You are playing a very dangerous game," Sophia said, her voice low. "With us, with the feds. If you betray him—" "I am not betraying him." Avery cut her off, her gaze fierce. "I'm trying to find the snake in his own house." She stepped closer to the head of security. "You are right. I am playing a dangerous game, but you need to ask yourself who the real enemy is. If Kroll betrays Severin at this auction, I want you to be the first to know, and I will be the one to give you the proof." Sophia's eyes searched hers. Looking for the lie, she found none. The plan was set, the auction was announced, but the city's underworld was not waiting for an invitation. A quiet message found its way to Severin. The Bayou Serpents had not been idle. They had formed an alliance. They were meeting with the Pontchartrain gatekeepers, the shadowy faction that controlled the unofficial traffic on the river. The auction might be the bait, but the real strike was now being planned for the water. The night before the auction was a shroud of suffocating humidity. A tropical storm, which had been idling in the Gulf, suddenly lunged inland, bringing with it a driving, sideways rain. Avery and Severin were at the Orchid Lyric Hall, the grand old theater chosen for the event. They were doing a final security and technical walkthrough, moving through the empty, echoing space that smelled of lemon oil, old velvet, and dust. The wind howled, rattling the tall, the arched windows. The main chandeliers flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the opulent hall into near total blackness. A second later, the emergency system kicked in, harsh. Battery-powered yellow lights clicked on, casting long, grotesque shadows that twisted the elegant architecture into something menacing. They were in the old sound booth at the back of the auditorium, a small, insulated room designed to be soundproof. The rain which had been a roar, was suddenly a dull, heavy thrum on the roof above. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, its modern electronic lock deadened by the power failure. "Well," Avery said, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the confined space, "this is a problem." Severin did not bother with the door. He walked to the small, thick-paned window that overlooked the rain-lashed courtyard. The emergency light in the hallway cast a sickly yellow beam, illuminating the side of his face. He looked unguarded. He looked profoundly tired. "I brought Nico here tonight," he said, his voice low, rougher than she had ever heard it. "Him and Mara. They are in the auxiliary office down the hall with Sophia, asleep. I thought it was safer here than the penthouse, less of a target." He turned, but his gaze seemed to go through her, focusing on a point in the darkness behind her. "He painted that picture of the bridge. He wants to help. He's 8 years old, and he is trying to fix my world." His hand, which had been resting on the back of a technician's chair, clenched. His knuckles went white as he gripped the worn vinyl. "I am terrified," he confessed, the words sounding as if they were torn from his throat. "Not of the serpents, not of the feds. I am terrified of him, of what he sees when he looks at me. I am afraid I am turning him into this. Into me. I am afraid that the darkness I have built will be the only thing he inherits." The admission hung in the air, a raw, vulnerable thing. This was not the boss of the Gilded Crescent. This was not the man who commanded rooms with his silence. This was a father, cornered by his own legacy. Avery's heart ached. She moved before she could second-guess the impulse. The room was small, just 2 steps, and then she was standing in front of him, inside his personal space. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cold draft from the window. Slowly, giving him every chance to stop her, she raised her hand. He watched her, his eyes dark, but he did not move. She placed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart. The material of his shirt was fine, crisp, beneath it. His heart was not calm. It was hammering, a fast, heavy, urgent rhythm that seemed to match the pounding of the rain on the roof. It was the most honest thing she had felt from him. He looked down at her hand, then up, his gaze meeting hers. His eyes were not cold, not calculating. They were hesitant, honest, and stripped of all pretense. He was not imposing his will. He was simply waiting. Avery rose slightly on her toes. He met her the rest of the way. The kiss was not a collision. It was not a desperate grab. It was a slow, deliberate, and certain claiming. It started softly, a question asked, and then deepened as he answered. It was warm. It was sure. It tasted of the chicory coffee he had been drinking and the electric charge of the storm. His hand came up, not to grab, not to hold, but to cradle the back of her head, his fingers threading gently into her hair. He shifted, his body pressing hers back against the wall, the heavy, sound-dampening velvet cushioning her spine. He shielded her from the room, from the world. Their breathing mingled, then hitched, then fell into a single, shared rhythm. It was a deep, consuming kiss, full of a respect that was more intoxicating than passion alone. The storm outside seemed to pause, the roar of the wind and rain easing for a moment, as if holding its breath with them. The intensity of the kiss, the shared silence, the undeniable connection became too much. They broke apart, but only by inches. He did not release her. She did not pull away. Their foreheads rested together. She could feel his eyelashes, damp, brushing her skin as he kept his eyes closed. Both of them were breathing heavily, the air in the small booth thick with what had just happened and what wanted to happen next. But the world was still waiting. Kroll, Juno, the serpents, and just down the hall, 2 sleeping children. This was not the time. This was not the place. "Avery," he whispered. His voice was a vibration she felt through her skin. "When this is safe," she whispered back, answering the question he had not asked. "When this is over, we will talk, like 2 normal people, not a hostage and her protector." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He gave a small, tight nod of confirmation. Avery felt a strange, powerful surge, not of fear, but of clarity. She was not afraid of this, of him. She was afraid of the circumstances. She realized, in that moment, that she possessed a healthy, powerful desire, not just for safety, but to be seen, to be respected, and to be wanted for the woman she was, not the symbol she had become. He stepped back, decisively creating space between them. The spell was broken. They stood on opposite sides of the small, dark room, the silence now heavier than the storm. The fire had been lit. It did not need to be flaunted. They just needed to survive long enough to tend it. When Sophia finally pried the door open 10 minutes later, her flashlight cutting through the gloom, she found them standing apart, maintaining a proper distance, as if they had simply been waiting out the power failure. The Orchid Lyric Hall was alive. A live jazz quartet played on the stage, the mournful brass notes weaving through the clinking of champagne glasses and the low murmur of New Orleans high society. The air smelled of money, perfume, and the faint, sweet scent of gardenias. But beneath the elegance, the room was wired. Tiny cameras, disguised as decor, watched from every angle. Nico was fidgeting in his small tuxedo, standing beside his artwork. It was titled Bridge of Rainy Lights, the watercolor he had painted in the penthouse. It was vibrant, innocent, and painfully out of place. Severin stood near him, his presence a silent wall of protection, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Sebastian Kroll arrived exactly at 8 o'clock, exuding financial confidence. He carried a heavy, reinforced hardware briefcase, the mobile terminal for his Lapis Gate operations. "Miss Kincaid," he said, giving Avery a slick smile. "The man of the hour needs his connection." Avery, elegant in a simple dark dress, nodded. "Of course. Mr. Kroll, the high-speed terminal is right here." She gestured to a private alcove. "The network port is just behind the desk." Kroll plugged in, frowned, and checked his device. There is no connection. "Oh, goodness," Avery said, feigning confusion. "You must have the auxiliary port. The main port is on the other wall. It requires manual configuration for security." Kroll sighed, annoyed by the incompetence. "Just move the desk. I will handle it. No." He knelt, plugged into the correct port, and began typing. His fingers flying across his private keyboard, he was forced to manually enter his security keys and routing protocols to connect. On the other side of the room, at her donation management laptop, Avery watched her screen. A hidden log captured every keystroke, every protocol Kroll used. He was exposing his entire private process, live to her recording. At the same time, Juno Morrow, disguised as a venue technician, watched her own device from a balcony. She saw the connection go live. She initiated her agency's data snoop instantly. Her screen filled with transaction data. She smiled, believing she was watching Severin LaRosa access his master wallet. She was wrong. Avery's sandbox had been activated. Juno was seeing a pre-recorded, sanitized data loop, a digital ghost Avery had created. The real recording, the one happening inside Avery's virtual trap, was logging two things: Kroll's illegal transfer and the illegal intrusion signature of Juno's own agency. "And now," the auctioneer announced, "a very special piece, Lot 12, Bridge of Rainy Lights by Master Nico LaRosa, benefiting the Starlight Quarters." Nico held his breath as his painting was displayed. The bidding started low. Then, a voice from the back, a phone bidder, called out, $10,000. The room went quiet. 15,000. The same bidder countered their own bid. "Sold!" The auctioneer slammed the gavel. "For $20,000 to our anonymous friend." Nico stared, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked up at his father. Severin placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a rare, small smile touching his lips. "It seems," Severin said, his voice just for Nico, "that there are true philanthropists left in this city." Nico beamed, his entire posture changing, radiant with pride. Kroll, meanwhile, was finalizing his large, shadowy transfer. just as he was about to hit the final key. The lights in the Orchid Lyric Hall snapped off. The jazz music died. The room was plunged into absolute blackness. People screamed, a wave of panic rising. Then, the emergency lights flared on, the same harsh, yellow beams from the storm, casting the room in a terrifying glow. In that split second of confusion, Kroll reacted, grabbing for his briefcase, but he was too slow. A dark figure, moving with the chaos, grabbed the hardware case. An identical briefcase was dropped in its place. Kroll stared at the replacement, his face pale. Sophia Vale, who had not been watching the stage but the exits, saw the exchange. She did not hesitate. She moved like a shadow, disappearing through a backstage corridor in pursuit of the thief. On Avery's laptop, running on its own battery, a small icon flashed, "Download complete." She opened the file. It was not just data, it was audio. Kroll's voice, recorded from his own device's microphone during the connection. "Pontchartrain gatekeepers," Kroll's voice hissed. "The transfer is moving. The Dawn River trip is a go." The chaos was Juno's signal. This was the moment. She and two agents, their Federal Urban Integrity Service vests now visible, moved through the panicked crowd. They were not moving toward Kroll. They were moving toward Severin, who was shielding Nico with his own body. "Severin LaRosa," Juno shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "You are under arrest for financial crimes." Her agents reached for him. "No," Avery said. She stepped directly between Juno and Severin. "Get out of the way, Kincaid," Juno snarled. "You are interfering!" Avery held up her laptop, the screen glowing in the dim light. "You have the wrong man," she spoke in a low, fast whisper, for Juno's ears only. "That is Kroll's signature, not Severin's. He has been running a side operation." Juno stared, confused. "That is not what my data shows." "Because I fed you a ghost," Avery whispered. "Look again." She toggled the screen. A new log appeared. "That," she pointed, "is Kroll's real transfer, and that is your agency's digital signature, illegally accessing this system without a specific warrant." Juno's blood ran cold. She saw it. Avery had recorded the entire illegal snoop. "You press send on that arrest report," Avery said, her voice like ice. "And I send this log to your superiors and the press. Your career will burn right alongside Kroll's." Juno was trapped. Her face was a mask of fury. "What do you want?" Avery did not blink. "Kroll is the target. He just confirmed a meeting with the Pontchartrain gatekeepers. A river trip at dawn to move his hardware. You want a bust? There is your bust. Kroll, the serpents, and the gatekeepers, all in one net. And you, my name, my daughter's name, wiped from every list you have, full immunity. We were never here. You were never here. You were acting on an anonymous tip." Juno stared at Severin, who was watching them, his face unreadable. She looked at Avery. She made the choice. "The docks," she hissed at Avery. "Give me the location." She turned to her agents. "False alarm, secure the perimeter. We are moving out." The Mississippi River was a channel of gray fog and cold diesel fumes before dawn. The Violent Mercy was not a ship, but a wide, flat industrial barge, its rust-streaked hull sitting low in the dark water. It was moving slowly, purposefully, away from the city. On its deck sat a single 40-foot refrigerated container, a low electric hum vibrating from it. Inside was not frozen cargo, but a rack of crypto-mining workstations and the hard drives containing Sebastian Kroll's blackmail data. The deal had been simple. Avery gives Juno the location, and Juno's team handles the bust. Severin and Avery were to be miles away, completely deniably safe. But they were not safe. They were standing on the damp, cold steel of the barge, having boarded from a shadowy private dock just minutes before. The plan had changed an hour ago, with a single terrifying video message sent to Severin's encrypted phone. It was not a simple threat. It was a sophisticated, AI-generated clip. It showed Nico, his face digitally distorted with fear, crying, Then the video switched to Avery, a gun barrel pressed to her temple, her voice, synthesized but convincing, begging Severin for help. The audio was Kroll's, "If the boss does not come to the party himself, the new mother disappears. Come alone. Bring her. Or the next clip is real." Kroll was not just running when he was setting a trap. He wanted to isolate Severin from his security, using Avery as the bait. Severin, seeing the threat, had no choice but to call the bluff. And Avery, seeing the image of Nico, refused to stay behind. Now they stood on the deck, the fog wrapping around them, Severin's gaze scanning the darkness, Avery's heart pounding, a heavy, cold rhythm. They were completely exposed. But they were not alone. Hidden on the riverbank, tucked in the reeds, Juneau's federal TAC team was in place, thermal scopes trained on the barge, and further down the river, the engine of her speedboat muffled. Sophia Vale shadowed their every move, a sniper rifle resting on the bow. The Triple Cross was in motion. Sebastian Kroll emerged from the shadows near the container, his expensive suit now damp with river mist. He was not alone. 2 of his Crown Delta guards stood with him. He was smiling, a look of triumphant arrogance. "Severin and Miss Kincaid, how punctual," Kroll said, spreading his hands. "You actually came. You really do have a weakness, after all." "The drive, Kroll," Severin said, his voice flat, emotionless. "The hardware. It is over." Kroll laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Over. It is just beginning. Did you really think I would let you, or the feds, or the serpents just take my retirement?" He patted the refrigerated container. "This is my insurance. And this." He held up a small, blocky device with a red switch, a detonator, "is my severance package." Avery's eyes widened as she saw the wiring snaked beneath the barge's railings. "The whole barge is wired with industrial explosives," Kroll explained, enjoying his monologue. "The Bayou Serpents are waiting on the bridge upriver, thinking they are ambushing you. The feds are, I assume, hiding on the shore, thinking they are ambushing me. I am going to wipe the entire board clean, the hardware, the feds, the serpents, and you, Severin. The city will just think the great Severin LaRosa finally died in a gang war he could not control." Severin's hand moved toward his jacket. "I would not," Kroll warned. "It is a dead man's switch. My thumb comes off. We all go." While Kroll gloated, Avery's eyes darted around the deck. She was not a fighter, but she was a problem solver. She saw it. Bolted to the bulkhead was a cheap, industrial control panel for the barge's automated systems. Its plastic casing was yellowed, the interface ancient. It was a simple machine, controlling the bilge, the lights, and the fuel lines. It was unpatched, unsecured, and she knew its default administrator password from her online classes. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was ice. As Kroll explained his genius, Avery took 3 slow, deliberate steps backward, as if in fear. She was now standing beside the panel. Her fingers found the keypad, shielded by her body. She typed, "Access granted." She was in. She could not stop the detonator, but Kroll's explosives were wired to use the barge's diesel fuel as an accelerant. She found the command, "Fuel line valve reroute, primary tank to auxiliary ballast." She hit enter. She had not disarmed the bomb. She had just delayed the main charge, buying them minutes. Kroll saw the green light on the panel flicker. "What did you do?" he roared. He was done talking. He lunged, not for Severin, but for the immediate threat. He grabbed Avery, yanking her back with a brutal arm, locking it around her throat. He pressed the cold steel of his pistol to her temple. "End of the line, Severin!" Kroll screamed, his face a mask of panic and rage. "Drop your weapon or she dies right here." Severin stared at them. Avery was choking, her feet dangling. He looked at Kroll's gun, at the detonator. This was the moment, the man who controlled everything, who never gave an inch. Slowly, deliberately, Severin LaRosa placed his pistol on the metal deck and slid it away. "Let her go, Kroll," he said, his voice hoarse, raw. "It is me you want. Take me. A trade." He offered himself, The words hit Avery with the force of a physical blow. In this world of betrayal, he was offering his life for hers. Just then, a phone rang. It was Kroll's. He snarled, ignoring it. It rang again, a persistent, chiming video call. He was losing control, furious. He ripped the phone from his pocket, still holding Avery, to see who was interfering. The call was from Sophia. Kroll tapped accept, ready to scream, but the image was not of Sophia. It was Nico. He was in Sophia's speedboat, the phone held tight in his small hands, the lights of the shore distant behind him. He was crying, but his voice was clear. "Miss Avery," he shouted, his voice tiny and breaking. "Don't let him do it. Don't let Dad do it alone." Nico's voice, his courage, broke the terrible spell, Kroll stunned by the child's appearance. His concentration shattered for a single, fatal tenth of a second, loosened his grip. Avery did not wait. She snapped her head back, smashing her skull into his nose. As he grunted in pain, she drove her heel down onto his instep. He roared. She did not stop. She used his own grip against him, twisting her wrist, dropping her weight, and pulling his arm over her shoulder. His elbow joint locked, and she snapped it backward with all her strength. A sickening pop echoed on the deck. Kroll screamed, a sound of pure agony, his arm breaking, his gun hand opened involuntarily. As Kroll staggered, Severin moved. He did not punch, he did not posture. He launched himself forward in a low, brutal tackle. Wrapping his arms around Kroll's legs, the two men crashed to the steel deck, the detonator skittering away. Fui's hands in the air do not move. The barge was suddenly flooded with light. Juno's team, clad in black, stormed up the gangplank, their weapons trained on everyone. "It is over, Kroll," Juno yelled, her gun leveled. "You are all—" Whip-crack, ping. A bullet sparked off the railing inches from Juno's head. Gunfire erupted, not from the deck, but from high above, the Bayou Serpents, positioned on the skeletal frame of the bridge overhead, had opened fire on the feds, on Kroll, and on Severin, indiscriminately turning the barge into a killing floor. The world exploded. High-velocity rounds whipped through the fog, screaming as they ricocheted off the steel deck. The air was filled with the sharp crack of rifles from the bridge and the percussive thump of the Fuis agents' return fire. It was a chaotic, three-sided war. "Kroll the detonator," Severin roared, moving to retrieve the device. A bullet tore through the air, grazing his shoulder. It was not a deep wound, but the impact spun him around, a line of fire searing his suit jacket. He grunted, stumbling. "No!" Avery screamed. She did not run. She reacted. She grabbed him, shoving him with all her weight behind the solid base of a deck crane, a solid piece of metal between them and the rain of bullets from above. "You are hit," she said, her voice frantic but low. "It is nothing," he growled, trying to move. "It is not nothing," she snapped back. She saw a red plastic box on the bulkhead first aid. She sprinted to it, ripped it off the wall, and was back in seconds. She tore open a thick gauze package, her hands shaking but her purpose clear. "Jack it off, now." He did not argue. He winced as he shrugged out of the ruined jacket. She pressed the gauze hard against the bleeding wound, her other hand bracing against his good shoulder. "Breathe," she commanded, her voice fierce. "Just breathe." The barge was a death trap. Juno Morrow was pinned behind a small stack of chemical drums, her agents forming a tight perimeter. Kroll was on the ground, screaming, clutching his broken arm. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the new one was deadly. Dock workers on the shore, drawn by the Fuis arrival, were now visible, exposed on the pier, panicking. Juno was faced with an impossible choice. Her primary target, Severin LaRosa, was 5 feet away, wounded, vulnerable. Her duty was to arrest him. Her other target, Kroll, was incapacitated, but the men on the bridge were firing at her team and at the civilians on the shore. "Agent, target LaRosa," one of her men yelled. Juno raised her pistol, her arm locked, her sights trained directly on Severin's chest. Severin met her gaze. He was unarmed, wounded, and shielding Avery with his body. He did not move. He did not plead. He just waited. "No!" Avery screamed from behind the crane, her voice raw. "Look at the shore! They are firing on civilians. Choose people. Juno, choose the people." Juno's gaze snapped from Severin to the panicked dockworkers. A bullet sparked on the concrete near them. She made the decision. "Covering fire, draw them off the civilians," Juno roared. Changing her aim, she fired 2 warning shots at the bridge, then turned to her agent. "Get those men down, pull them back." She abandoned her targets, her entire case, to save the innocent bystanders, dragging a terrified dockworker who had frozen in fear to safety behind a stack of pallets. Meanwhile, in the water, Sophia Vale saw her moment. The firefight was a distraction. Her mission was the evidence. She steered her speedboat, a low, powerful black craft, out of the shadows. It was not a patrol boat, it was a tow. She threw a heavy gauge cable with a magnetic grappling hook, locking it onto the corner of the refrigerated container Kroll had rigged. Avery, watching from behind the crane, saw it. Severin, her plan B. Sophia hit the throttle. The boat's powerful engine screamed, the cable went taut, and with a groan of metal, the entire 40-foot container, held only by light deck locks, slid off the barge. It hit the water with a monumental splash and was immediately towed, a floating fortress of evidence, downriver and away from the fight. Kroll saw it. He saw his leverage, his blackmail, his entire future being dragged away. He was finished. And if he was finished, so was everyone else. With a final, pain-fueled roar, he reached inside his jacket with his good hand and pulled out a second, smaller remote, a backup. "If I cannot have it, no one can," he screamed, and jammed his thumb down on the button. There was a muffled thump, then a secondary, massive whoosh. But it was not the barge that vaporized. It was a small, auxiliary fuel tank at the far end of the vessel, the one Avery had rerouted the fuel line to. The explosion was huge, a massive ball of diesel fire, but it was contained, controlled. It was not a killing blow, it was a smokescreen. A thick, oily black cloud instantly enveloped the entire barge, blotting out the lights, the fog, and the snipers. "They cannot see us," Avery yelled. "This is it, we have to go." She grabbed Severin's hand. He was not a boss. She was not a waitress. They were 2 people in the dark, trying to survive. She pulled him toward the gangplank, toward the shore, toward the sound of Juno yelling orders. In the heart of the smoke, he stopped, pulling her back. He gripped her hand. It was not a pull. It was not a gesture of control. It was a handshake. Firm, quick, and absolute. His palm was calloused and warm. Her hand, covered in his blood, met his. It was a contract, an agreement, a silent acknowledgement. They had lived in shades of gray, on opposite sides of a moral line. Now, in the smoke, they were the same. They had seen the truth of each other, and they had not looked away. The smoke began to clear. The firing from the bridge had stopped. A FUIS drone, which had been holding position, now descended, its spotlight fixing on Kroll as Juno and her team. Their duty to protect civilians done, moved in, and put him in cuffs. The Serpents had seen it all. They saw the feds, the live-streaming drone, and their target, Kroll, being arrested, exposed, their ambush a failure. They melted back into the shadows of the bridge. Juno, her face black with soot and fury, marched straight to Avery, who was helping Severin sit on a piling on the shore. "You," Juno hissed, jabbing a finger at her, "you ruined my case. He," she motioned to Severin, "is the target, the real target. You saved my team. You saved those civilians. But you compromised my entire operation." Avery looked up, her face pale, exhausted, but her eyes were clear. "You are wrong," she said, her voice quiet. "You just saved a child. Go look." Severin's head snapped up. He followed her gaze. Through the last, thinning wisps of smoke, he saw the black speedboat. Sophia was at the helm, and sitting next to her, wrapped in a tactical vest that was comically large, was Nico. He was safe. He was on the shore. And he was waving. his small hand moving back and forth in the pre-dawn light. Severin looked at his son. The coldness, the calculation, the weight of his empire, all of it dissolved. The eyes that watched Nico were not those of a boss or a target or a criminal. They were the eyes of a father. They were the eyes of a man who was, for the first time, profoundly and completely grateful. The day after the firefight on the barge, the city seemed to exhale. The suffocating fog had burned away, replaced by a bright, sharp November sun. In moonlit oaks, a public park that edged the river, the community gathered for a Reclaim Our River event. It had been planned as a protest against industrial pollution, but after the night's chaos, it felt more like a celebration of survival. Amid the local artists and food stalls, one small painting stood on a special easel. It was Nico's Bridge of Rainy Lights. He stood beside it, his small suit replaced by jeans and a sweater. When the local paper announced his painting had raised $20,000 for the Starlight Quarters, the crowd erupted in applause. They were not clapping for a La Rosa. They were clapping for a little boy's painting. Across the park, Avery saw Agent Juno Morrow. She was in civilian clothes, drinking a coffee, looking exhausted. Juno walked over. Not as an agent, but as a courier. She handed Avery a simple manila folder. "The U.S. announced the arrest of Sebastian Kroll this morning," Juno said, her voice flat, all business. "Along with 2 of our internal supervisors who were facilitating his accounts. That container, Sophia Vale, appropriated. Was the whole case. It was clean." Avery opened the folder. Inside was a single, notarized document, a full immunity agreement signed and dated, and a second document placing her mother in a protected federal witness program, her medical debts erased. "The deal is done," Avery said. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. "The deal is done," Juno agreed. Severin made his own moves. He did not issue a press release. He held a private meeting. Lapis Gate was to be dissolved, its infrastructure wiped, its assets legally seized and forfeited, the legitimate funds of the Gilded Crescent Foundation, however, were rerouted. He endowed a full, permanent scholarship at the University for Cybersecurity. He named it the Alara Kincaid Memorial Scholarship, after Avery's mother. It was an act of quiet atonement, turning the tools of his trade into a path for someone else's legitimate escape. That evening, they were in a new apartment. It was not the sterile penthouse. It was a warm, bright space overlooking the river, with room for Mara's violin stand and Nico's art supplies. As she unpacked a box, Avery's fingers closed around the small, antique ring Severin had given her weeks ago, the one he had called a protective charm. She walked to him where he stood by the window, watching the river traffic. She held it out to him on her palm. "I cannot keep this," she said softly. He looked at the ring, then at her, his expression unreadable. "It was my mother's." "It is a charm, Severin. It is for protection," she said, her voice steady. "I do not want to be a protected asset. I want a partner. I need a friend who knows how to say he is sorry when he is wrong." He looked at the ring, then at her face. He did not take it. Instead, he gently closed her fingers around it. "I am sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "I'm sorry I ever made my son's choice a burden for you. That was not fair to you." She closed her hand, the metal warm. She had not been asking for the apology, but it settled something deep inside her. Later that night, the children asleep, they stood on the balcony. The air was cool, carrying the salty, brackish smell of the river. He did not grab her. He did not crowd her. He simply stood beside her, offering his warmth in the chill. She was the one who turned, stepping into his space, her body finally relaxing against his. His arms came around her, holding her securely, his hands resting on the small of her back, a safe and solid anchor. She leaned her head against his chest, closing her eyes, listening to the steady, calm beat of his heart. It was not the frantic, trapped rhythm she had felt in the sound booth. This was peace. He tipped her chin up with one finger, The kiss that followed was not the desperate, storm-fueled kiss from the theater. It was slow and deep and profoundly patient. It was a promise of mornings, of shared coffee, of homework battles and quiet evenings. His lips were soft, sure, and moved against hers with a tenderness that spoke of a future, not just a frantic present. When they parted, they rested their foreheads together. "We go slow," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "We go slow, so the children always feel safe." The next morning, Avery woke up in her own bed, the sun streaming in. Mara was already awake, the faint, hopeful notes of her violin scales drifting from the other room. Avery stretched, feeling a strange lightness. Her hand brushed something under her pillow. It was a piece of notebook paper, folded into a small square. She opened it. It was Nico's handwriting, careful and young. "Dear Mrs. Avery," it read, "I know I chose you, but that was a lot of pressure. If you are not ready to be a mom, that is okay. You can just be my Avery. I will wait." Avery's breath hitched. A single tear rolled down her cheek, landing on the paper, blurring the ink, the choice, the impossible. Crushing burden of his words in the diner had been lifted. He had given her an out, and in doing so, he had given her the only reason she ever needed to stay. She did not accept the title of mother. She did not move into Severin's room. Instead, she accepted the commitment. She accepted going with Severin to a parent-teacher conference. She accepted teaching Nico how to build a diorama of the solar system, and she accepted taking both Mara and Nico to the park, forming a strange, wounded, but fiercely loyal new family. It was a family blended by choice, not by blood or by paper. Weeks later, the city held its annual Festival of Lights on the waterfront. The air was festive, full of the smell of hot beignets and roasted pecans. Avery saw Juno Morrow at a coffee stand, the agent, off-duty, bought a drink and looked over at Avery. She gave a small, sharp nod. It was not friendship. It was respect. Severin, looking more relaxed than Avery had ever seen him, lifted Nico onto his shoulders so the boy could see over the crowd. Nico's laughter was bright and real, a sound of pure childhood. Avery reached out and took Mara's hand. As the first firework exploded high above the Mississippi, a shower of green and gold reflecting in the dark water, the four of them stood together. They were not perfect. They were not fixed. But as they watched the sky ignite, all four of them were laughing. They were brave. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment below and let us know where you are listening from. We would love to connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.